The moment the glass hit the marble, everything stopped. Not because it was loud, it wasn't. Not because someone was hurt, they weren't. But because she smiled when it shattered. That crooked, sideways smile that said, "Now we begin." The party music stuttered. Conversations dried up mid-sentence. Her mother gasped. Her boss shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I was still holding the chair, half sitting, half standing, not yet sure if I was meant to stay or go. She raised her glass again, a new one someone had handed her, and turned toward me. Only me. "If you're going to act like the victim," she said, voice syrupy and sharp, "then maybe you should leave like one." Someone laughed. I couldn't tell who. It echoed too much. She didn't break eye contact. Not for a second. Everyone was watching now, the caterers frozen near the appetizers, her coworkers awkwardly fiddling with their napkins, the neighbor across the yard who pretended he wasn't eavesdropping. She wanted this to be a performance. I wasn't ready to give her one. But I was tired, bone tired. Not from the day, not from work, not even from her. I was tired of wondering if this was finally the moment when she'd stop being cruel long enough to be kind. So I stood up slowly. No drama. No words. I reached into my pocket, took out a folded square of paper, and laid it gently on the white tablecloth. Then I turned, not quickly, not angrily, just turned. She said something behind me, loud enough for the crowd but quiet enough that I couldn't hear. I didn't look back. The paper? She'd read it later. And when she did, everything she thought she understood about me would fall apart, because I wasn't walking away in defeat. I was walking away, because I already knew. And the truth was waiting in the glove box of my car, neatly recorded, time-stamped, and more damning than she ever imagined. I remember the heat of the steering wheel. Not from the sun, but from my hands. I gripped it like it could anchor me to something real, something solid, because everything else, the lawn, the laughter, the party lights flickering like mocking applause, all of it felt like a hallucination. I didn't start the engine. Not yet. I sat there for a moment, staring at the reflection in the rearview mirror. My own face looked foreign, like I had aged 10 years during that walk from the backyard to the car. My tie was crooked. My bottom lip was trembling. My eyes, they weren't angry, just hollow. But then I opened the glove box. The flash drive was still there, labeled with nothing but a red piece of tape, the kind you'd use to seal a wound. I held it in my hand, feeling its weightless plastic shell and its unbearable meaning. I hadn't planned on using it. Not tonight. Not ever, if I could help it. But after what she did back there, in front of everyone, like I was just a prop in her latest drama, I knew she left me no choice. You see, for weeks, I had been feeling like something wasn't adding up. Her new perfume, which she claimed she got from a co-worker but never wore to work. The text message I saw flash across her smartwatch while she was in the shower, same time Friday? Wine glass from a contact saved as dentist. She hates the dentist. She hasn't gone in 2 years. The subtle shift in how she spoke to me, like I was a mildly inconvenient roommate she tolerated for legal reasons. So I did what any man with an aching gut and a shattered ego would do. I hired someone. I told myself it was just to prove I was being paranoid, to calm my spiraling thoughts. But deep down, I think I knew. I think I always knew. The private investigator didn't waste time. 2 weeks later, he delivered a flash drive to my classroom in a padded envelope. I didn't open it right away. I kept it sealed in the glove box like a ticking bomb, convincing myself that not knowing was better, that loving the idea of her was easier than facing the truth about her. But now, after she humiliated me in front of friends, family, coworkers, after she smirked while reducing our 12-year marriage to a punchline, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I plugged the drive into my laptop that night, alone, in the basement, with a bottle of whiskey I had been saving for our anniversary. The footage wasn't grainy. It was clear. Uncomfortably clear. There she was, my wife, stepping into a silver SUV that didn't belong to anyone we knew. Laughing, leaning, placing a hand on the driver's thigh like it belonged there. The video showed them checking into a small lakefront and under fake names. It showed her kissing him in the parking lot, laughing like she used to with me. It showed them returning 2 nights later, her wearing one of my sweatshirts. But the worst part wasn't what they did. It was how she looked at him, like he was the person she had always been waiting for. I paused the video when they got out of the car, just before they kissed again. And I sat there, staring at the frozen screen. Then I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Instead, I printed one of the stills. Just one. The one where her hand rested on his face, and her wedding ring sparkled under the streetlight. That was the photo I placed on the folded paper on the table at the dinner party, the one I left behind. The guest probably hadn't noticed it at first, but she would. Later, after the drinks and the fake laughs faded, after she went back to her seat expecting praise and gossip, she would see that glossy image staring back at her. And in that moment, the woman who thought she controlled the story would realize the story had just begun, without her. And me? I wasn't finished yet. It was 3:11 a.m. when my phone started buzzing on the nightstand. I didn't move. I'd been lying there for hours in the dark, not sleeping, just existing in the kind of silence that's louder than any scream. 3 missed calls. All from her. Lacey never called after midnight unless something was wrong. And now, finally, something was. But I didn't pick up. Instead, I watched the screen go dark again and listened as the house creaked in the quiet, the sound of a home holding its breath. I knew what she'd say. She'd start soft, gentle, like nothing happened. "Lowell? Are you home? Can we talk?" Then the voice would shift. That tone she used when she didn't get what she wanted. That "how dare you" pitch that made everything suddenly my fault. But I was done playing the guilty party in a story I didn't write. I stayed up until sunrise, not out of spite but out of clarity. I needed the sun to remind me that it wasn't a dream, that I really had walked out, that the photo was real, that the person I married had unraveled so completely and so publicly that there was no going back. And while the city was still quiet and the sky was still pink with morning haze, I drove to a nearby cafe and ordered black coffee I didn't want. I just needed somewhere else to sit. At 8:04 a.m., my brother Jasper texted me, "Dude, you okay?" Lacey showed up at Mom's house bawling. I stared at the message for a long time. Not because it surprised me, of course she'd go to my family, but because of how fast it had started. The panic. The unraveling. She was losing control and reaching for anything that still looked like stability, even if that meant pretending to be the wounded one. I replied with one word. "Fine." Jasper didn't text again. But then something strange happened. By noon, I had 3 separate people send me screenshots. Not from her, but from other people who had been at the party, guests who had stayed late after I left. Turns out, when Lacey sat back down at the table, all smug and victorious, she saw the folded paper under her plate. She picked it up casually, probably expecting a snarky goodbye. What she saw instead was the photograph. One guy who messaged me, her coworker Alex, who I barely know, said the whole table went silent. She turned pale. Not embarrassed. Not angry. Pale. Like someone had just handed her a photo of a ghost. Apparently, she tried to laugh it off, called it an old photo, said it was nothing, but then someone else at the table, someone named Blair, leaned forward and said, "That's not just any car. That's Tom's car." Tom. Of all people, it had to be Tom Evans, the former intern-turned regional sales manager who used to house sit for us when we traveled. I didn't even think about him until that moment. But of course, he had easy access. Knew our schedules. He even watered Lacey's plants when she traveled alone. The room didn't explode. It imploded. Quietly, awkwardly, and completely. People started grabbing their purses. Her boss, I'm told, left without saying goodbye. Her sister apparently whispered something like, "You're unbelievable," before walking out. By the time the night was over, she was standing in that backyard alone, with half a cupcake in her hand and no one left to hear her side. And me? I was still sipping coffee in a cafe 3 towns away, watching pigeons fight over crumbs. When I got back home, I noticed something odd. The garage door had been opened. My laptop was gone, not stolen, just gone. And the backup drive I'd left plugged into the office PC? That too. She had come into the house. She had searched. She had tried to clean the mess. But what she didn't know was, that wasn't the only copy. She thought the photo was the only evidence. She didn't know I had more. And the worst part? She didn't even realize what else I knew, the one thing I hadn't told anyone yet. Not even Jasper. The part that would make everything else look like child's play. And it was coming. The thing about secrets is, they don't sit still. They fester. They crawl into corners and whisper to each other when you're asleep. You can try to ignore them, pretend they're harmless, but eventually they rot through the walls. And then you smell them. You see them. You choke on the fact that they were always there, growing. I thought the affair was the secret. I was wrong. 2 days after the party, after the text had slowed and the call stopped altogether, I remembered something I hadn't thought about since the day I picked up that flash drive from the PI. When I met with him, he'd slid the envelope across the diner table like he was handing over classified intel. But just before he got up to leave, he had said something offhandedly, like it was nothing. Oh, and there was a second file. Weird one. Labeled Cedar 917. Might be nothing. Kept it separate. Let me know if you want it. At the time, I didn't care. I just wanted answers about the cheating, about the lies. But now, sitting in my quiet kitchen while the fridge hummed and the silence clung to the walls like damp smoke, I wanted to know. I needed to know. I texted him. Just 5 words. Send me the second file. He replied within minutes. You sure? It's odd. I didn't respond. A few seconds later, a link landed in my inbox. I downloaded it immediately. No virus warnings. No red flags. Just one video file and a document. The video was grainy. Security footage from what looked like an underground parking garage. The timestamp said it was 3 weeks ago at 9:17 p.m. The camera pointed at a silver SUV, the same one from the first file. Lacey stepped out, wearing the same hoodie she told me she had donated months ago. She walked around to the back of the vehicle and opened the trunk. That's when I stopped breathing. Inside were cardboard boxes, all of them labeled with my name. I didn't know what I was expecting, but it wasn't that. She reached inside and pulled out a stack of my old yearbooks. Then a plastic bin full of my old military keepsakes, medals, my grandfather's dog tags, even the journals I kept when I did volunteer work in Haiti years ago. Why would she have any of that? Then the camera caught it. Barely, but I saw it. She took out one of my journals, flipped to a specific page, and held up her phone to photograph it. And she smiled, like she had won something. The file ended there. No sound. No explanation. I opened the document that came with the video. It was a scanned receipt. A shipping label. Destination, a law office in another state. Recipient, Wesley Gordon. My hands started shaking. Wesley Gordon was her ex. The one she swore she hadn't spoken to in years. The one she referred to as a teenage mistake. The one who used to live out west. The one she almost married before she met me. Suddenly everything began to warp. The arguments that didn't make sense. The odd questions she asked me months ago about what would happen to your pension if we divorced. The strange charge on our joint account last month for a notary fee. It hit me all at once. She wasn't just cheating. She was preparing. Preparing for something much bigger. She was gathering ammo. Against me. But why? Then I remembered the one drawer she always kept locked in her home office. She told me it was just tax stuff, documents too boring to care about. I grabbed a screwdriver and cracked it open. What I found made my blood run cold. Inside were printed emails. Dozens of them. Between her and an attorney. Discussing asset divisions. Behavioral patterns. Even instructions on how to establish a record of abandonment. She had been planning to frame me. She wanted me to walk out. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the night of the party to be my exit, so she could claim I left her, emotionally abandoned her, and tried to hide financial records. She even had screenshots of old bank transfers printed and labeled as evidence. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. It wasn't about love, or lust, or even Tom. It was a setup. And the part that still haunts me? She was almost successful. Almost. I sat there for I don't know how long, just staring at those emails. My brain was trying to keep up, but my hands had already gone numb. The stack of papers was thick, organized with tabs and underlines, like she had been rehearsing for a trial I didn't know was coming. I flipped through them slowly, barely breathing. There were notes in the margins, hers, written in tiny, perfect script. If he leaves, first advantage. Frame shift, emotional neglect, see therapist logs. Confirm April 17th argument date via call records. She wasn't just cheating. She had weaponized our entire life together. And suddenly I saw everything differently. Her exaggerated sighs when I'd come home late from work. Her sudden insistence that I stop texting during school hours because it was invasive. The night she goaded me into fights only to record them quietly on her phone. All of it was a long, slow push toward a single, awful moment. One where I snapped in public, walked out, and gave her exactly what she needed. A clean exit with all the sympathy, all the narrative, and everything we had built in her name. I wanted to scream. To flip the table. But I didn't. Because despite everything she thought, I wasn't built to explode. I was built to endure. And now that I knew what I was dealing with, I wasn't going to waste energy on rage. No, I would do exactly what she feared most. I would outthink her. I gathered every single document and scanned them into a hard drive. Not just backed up, triple-backed. One local copy, one on the cloud, and one stored in a safety deposit box I opened under a trust name she couldn't trace. I knew her tactics now, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The next step was subtle. I began documenting everything. My location, my conversations, my own therapy visits, which I scheduled and attended, making sure the notes would reflect someone seeking clarity, not escape. I even told the therapist, in writing, that I was feeling manipulated and emotionally entrapped by my wife. I wanted it on the record. Let her try and twist that later. But then came the part that changed everything. I went to visit someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 5 years, my old friend Walter, a tech consultant who used to work in cybersecurity for a law firm. We'd had a falling out years ago over something stupid, but he didn't ask questions when I showed up at his door. I handed him a thumb drive and told him I needed to know everything about it. All the metadata, all the transfer points, all the hidden traces she might have left behind. He worked on it for 2 days. When he finally called me, his voice was low, cautious. "Lowell," he said, "you need to see this in person." I met him at his office. He dimmed the lights and opened his screen. I thought the files were basic, some email correspondence and a few transfers. But there's a hidden archive embedded in the original folder. You wouldn't find it unless you were digging deep. Like deliberate obfuscation level stuff. He clicked through. My stomach clenched. Inside the hidden folder were audio recordings. Dozens of them. Clipped. Edited. Spliced. And every single one had my name in the file title. Lowell_argument_1.mp3. Lowell_neglect_2.mp3. Lowell_threats_fake.mp3. I stared at the screen, frozen. Some of these were made using voice AI, Walter said. Pretty low-level stuff, but good enough to fool someone in court who isn't paying attention. She had been building fake audio evidence. She had been editing our real conversations, cutting out her own provocations, stitching together a false narrative where I was emotionally unstable, verbally aggressive, even dangerous. It wasn't just a divorce setup. It was character assassination. And if I hadn't left the way I did, quietly, without a scene, without words, she would have used it all. Every minute of it. I leaned back in the chair and laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I had just realized something incredible. She had planned for every possible version of me. Angry, desperate, cruel, erratic. But she never planned for the one thing that would destroy her entire scheme. Me saying nothing. Me simply leaving. Me refusing to play the villain. And now? Now I had everything. And she had no idea. I didn't sleep that night. Not even a little. I just sat in my living room, lights off, watching the reflection of passing cars move across the ceiling like ghosts with somewhere better to be. My old dog Murphy snored on the couch beside me, completely unaware that his human had just uncovered one of the most meticulously designed betrayals imaginable. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was stunned by the scope of it. And I kept asking myself the same question. How long had she been building this? How long does it take to construct a version of someone so carefully distorted that it could survive legal scrutiny? The next morning, I made a quiet call to a law firm that had been recommended by someone I trusted, someone who had been through their own messy end but had come out clean on the other side. I didn't tell the receptionist much, just that I needed to speak with someone discreet and fast. An hour later, I was in a corner office downtown, explaining everything to a man named Victor Crane. Victor was in his 60s, wore a tie that looked older than me, and had a way of listening that made you feel like he already knew what you were about to say. He was just waiting to see if you'd be honest about it. I laid it all out. The affair. The fake audio files. The hidden folders. The organized evidence. Everything. When I finished, Victor leaned back and tapped his pen against the side of his chair. "She's good," he said finally. "But not smart. You don't fake records and plant digital evidence unless you plan to use them. And you don't use them unless you assume the other party is too broken or too stupid to find the cracks." He slid a legal pad across the table and handed me a pen. "Let's start from the top. Cleanly. You're not just going to walk away from this, Lowell. You're going to walk out with the house, your pension intact, and your name clear." That was the first moment I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Not anger, not sadness, but control. The plan we came up with was simple, quiet, and brutal in its precision. First, we filed a motion to secure and preserve all digital communications between both parties. Emails, texts, voice memos, everything. We cited concerns about possible tampering and misrepresentation. Once that motion hit her attorney's desk, it would signal to them that we weren't stumbling in the dark anymore. Second, I submitted to an independent psychological evaluation. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted the court to see exactly what I was: stable, rational, deeply wounded, but entirely coherent. No history of rage. No evidence of neglect. Just a man who had been trying to save a marriage already scheduled for demolition. Third, Victor suggested we go on the offensive politely. We sent her attorney a letter asking to clarify whether the materials in her possession were created by her directly or if she was provided them by a third party. It was a trap. The moment they admitted anything about the audio files, we could pounce on the AI manipulation angle and raise criminal concerns. But none of that prepared me for what happened next. 3 days after the letter went out, I got a knock at my front door. It was Lacey. No makeup, no jewelry, hair tied up like she hadn't slept. She stood on the porch holding a brown envelope and a half-empty bottle of water. She looked at me like I was the one who had disappeared, like I was the ghost now. I need to talk, she said, voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I didn't say a word. I stepped aside and let her walk in. She sat down at the kitchen table where she used to write holiday cards and grocery lists. She placed the envelope on the table between us. I made a mistake, she started, but I held up my hand. Don't apologize, I said, calm. Just tell me the truth. All of it. She didn't. Of course not. She gave me some version of the story with all the soft edges and blurry timelines, emotional confusion, professional stress, some nonsense about feeling like she was losing herself. She cried in all the right places. She swore nothing physical started until after she believed we were already drifting. She begged me not to ruin her career. That's when I knew she didn't come here out of guilt. She came here because she got scared. She knew the letter meant we were on to her. And she came to spin the story one more time, face to face, to try and rewrite the ending before it could be carved in stone. I didn't yell. I didn't even flinch. I waited for her to finish, and then I reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper, the notarized affidavit we drafted with Victor confirming all evidence had been documented, secured, and reviewed by a third party. This is what's happening now, I said. You can cooperate, or you can escalate. But either way, I'm done playing along. She stared at it like it was a grenade. Then she left without the envelope. She forgot it on the table. And inside it was something I never expected. The moment the front door closed behind her, I sat in complete stillness. You'd think I'd be shaking, pacing, shouting something. But no. I just sat there, staring at that envelope like it was ticking. Murphy lifted his head from the floor and looked at me, as if even he understood something about this wasn't normal. The way she'd left it behind. The way she never asked for it. The way she barely even looked at it while she was here. It wasn't an oversight. It was deliberate. And that's what scared me. I reached for it cautiously, as if the truth inside might bite. It was just a standard manila envelope, the kind you'd pick up at any office supply store. No name on the front, no label. Just sealed with a strip of transparent tape that had been hastily pressed down. I peeled it open and turned it upside down, letting the contents spill across the kitchen table, the very table where we once played cards, where we planned vacations, where we sat together through long winters wrapped in silence and coffee. What slid out were 6 pages, all printed in color, and a small flash drive. The pages were covered in screenshots, messages, mostly, and a photo I recognized immediately, a picture of me sitting in a bar 6 months ago, smiling across the table at someone. A woman. Her name was Clara. She was a former coworker from my school, someone I'd met for coffee back when things with Lacey were already cracked and crumbling. We didn't date. We didn't touch. But we talked. A lot. She was kind, smart, listened when I spoke like it actually mattered. Lacey had always known about Clara. She never once asked about her, until now. The screenshots were our old texts. Innocent stuff, supportive, flirty in the way two wounded people sometimes are when they feel seen for the first time in ages. But nothing illicit. Nothing that crossed any legal or moral line. Still, Lacey had annotated each image with yellow highlighter and red arrows, trying to make it all look worse than it was. Repeated emotional connection. Pattern of betrayal. Potential for hidden contact. Then I opened the flash drive. Inside was a single file, a video. My hands went cold the second I saw the preview image, a still shot of Clara at a park, sitting on a bench. I clicked play. It was shaky footage. Phone quality. Likely recorded from inside a car. The video tracked Clara as she spoke to a man I didn't recognize. They were smiling, laughing. She touched his shoulder briefly. There was no sound, but it didn't matter. The implication was clear. Lacey had followed her. She'd been watching Clara, stalking her. And then came the final piece. Tucked between the last 2 pages was a handwritten note. Not to me. To Clara. It read, "He still thinks you're innocent." But if you want to keep it that way, I suggest you stay gone. I felt the floor shift beneath me. I suddenly realized what this was. This wasn't guilt. This wasn't a truce. This envelope wasn't an olive branch. It was a warning. Not for me. For her. Lacey wasn't trying to save the marriage. She was trying to control the collapse. She was trying to eliminate the variables. And Clara? She was the last one. The only person who might testify, who might speak honestly about what I had endured. The one person who had seen my pain up close, before it all became courtroom evidence. I called Clara that evening. I hadn't spoken to her in weeks. When she answered, her voice trembled before I even said a word. She told me someone had been outside her apartment the last 2 nights. A silver SUV. Same make and model as Lacey's. She said she'd been too scared to come forward, afraid it would make things worse. And just like that, everything became clear. Lacey wasn't unraveling. She was accelerating. She was still playing chess, even after I'd flipped the board. But what she didn't know was, I wasn't playing defense anymore. I took the entire envelope, sealed it in a new file, and brought it to Victor the next morning. He flipped through the contents, nodding slowly as he read. "She's not just manipulative," he said calmly. "She's reckless. And now she's crossed a line." I raised my eyes. "Which line?" Victor looked up from the table. "Criminal intimidation. We weren't in civil territory anymore. And she had just stepped into a storm she wasn't prepared for." Victor moved fast. Faster than I expected. Within 24 hours, our team had filed a petition to present the intimidation evidence before the court. Clara, once understandably afraid, agreed to testify. She even brought with her a photo, the silver SUV parked outside her building at 1:43 a.m., time-stamped by her door camera. Lacey had underestimated her. But more importantly, Lacey had underestimated me. For weeks, she had constructed a version of reality where I was predictable, quiet, passive, too tired to fight. But what she didn't understand was that men like me, the invisible ones, the ones who make dinner, take out the trash, pick up prescriptions, say yes, dear, to avoid another Cold War, we're not weak. We're patient. And when we move with certainty. The hearing was held 2 weeks later. I wore the same tie I had worn on our 10th anniversary. Not out of sentiment, but because I wanted to remind myself that I had been real. That my love had been real. The judge listened quietly as Victor laid everything out. The false evidence, the forged timeline, the AI-manipulated recordings, the attempts to bait me into emotional outbursts, the stalking of Clara, and finally, the letter Lacey had intended as a threat, left behind like a forgotten weapon. Her attorney tried to pivot, of course, claimed emotional distress, misinterpretation, miscommunication. But you can't miscommunicate 30 separate fabricated audio files. You can't misinterpret surveillance footage of a woman trying to erase the only person left who could vouch for the truth. When the judge finally spoke, her words were simple. This is not the behavior of a betrayed wife. This is the architecture of control. Within minutes, the court granted me a full divorce decree, uncontested. I kept the house. I kept my pension. I kept my name. The judge also issued a protective order barring Lacey from any contact with me or Clara, and referred her file to the district attorney for further review. I didn't cheer. I didn't even smile. But I did breathe, deeply, freely, for the first time in what felt like years. And just like that, it was over. I wish I could tell you that I felt triumphant. But the truth is, I just felt clean. Like stepping out of a burning building, soot-covered, eyes burning, but still breathing. Still alive. Still me. Clara and I stayed in touch. Not romantically. Not yet. Just two people who survived the same storm and understood each other's silences better than most. She sent me a card weeks later. No return address. Just one sentence written in neat blue ink. "Thank you for not giving up on the truth. I've since started fresh. I transferred to a new school district across state lines. Smaller classes, quieter halls, more sunlight in the mornings. Murphy comes with me every day now. The kids love him. I spend weekends building birdhouses, hiking without my phone, eating breakfast at diners where nobody knows my name. Sometimes, at night, I still hear her voice in my head. That sing-song sarcasm. That icy logic. But it doesn't haunt me anymore. It's just a memory now, like bad wallpaper from a house you don't live in anymore. To those reading this, hoping for strength, for peace, for proof that walking away is survival, let me say this. You are not weak for staying quiet, but you are powerful when you choose to walk away with your dignity intact. And me? I didn't win because I fought harder. I won because I refused to become the man she wanted to destroy. And that, in the end, was the only thing that mattered. Thank you for listening.